and she's going to inform us about the world of spiders and stuff she's been working on. I looked at her notes today, and she had like 15 pages of stuff that she referenced. So looking forward to learning a little bit about spiders. So without further ado, Allison.
Allison Sumner.
Allison Sumner.
So I wanted to point out before I start that I'm totally an amateur when it comes to this kind of stuff. I'm not professionally trained in any way. I am kind of just using books and the internet and whatever resources I can get to inform myself. So I can make mistakes with some of these things. I'm not perfect at identifying spiders yet. I'd say I know a little bit more about their biology than I do their taxonomy. So I just wanted to get that out of the way that I am not a professional at this yet. And also that I didn't include all of the references on the slides for what I did research for. I'm still kind of trying to figure out how to incorporate my citations and references into the slides. So to see everything that I used or anything that was not included in the slideshow, you can look at the works cited list, which will be with this, and it can be made available after the presentation is over.
We're super glad to have you, Allison. Yes, totally appreciate it.
Thank you. So for the presentation, I'll just be going over some interesting facts I gathered about spiders, just that I learned over the years and by looking in scientific literature, and just some things I thought would be cool and that some people might find kind of unexpected to learn about spiders. Or all of them in one presentation. That there are a lot of them. Picture here shows and this one are orb weavers, those and that's something I didn't write them families, and they're found species will just put out a thread. I thought was really interesting. and it sounds like roughly or it would just go back to sense of how many prey items I've seen that happen. I've seen REM sleep, like rapid eye movement. And so of see what was going on inside of the exoskeleton where they could see if the retinas were moving. With most adult jumping spiders, you aren't able to see the retinas other than in a few species. And so with the juveniles, they would observe that they appeared to be sleeping, but the retinas were moving, the legs were twitching, and it was moving a little bit, but it appeared to be at rest. So they concluded that they're experiencing something similar to REM sleep and that they might be experiencing something probably not exactly like what humans experience with dreaming, but something somewhat analogous to that, like kind of similar. And I actually have a video here, if I can get it to work, that I got earlier this year of wolf spiders actually making sound using abdomen percussion and stridulation. And it's something they will sometimes use in courtship. Not sure if I'm going to be able to get it to work right now, but possibly later after the presentation is over, I could probably go into the slideshow with my account rather than like screen sharing it for Zoom, and I might be able to get it to play the video. It's really interesting, and you can actually see them tap their abdomens, and after that, the spider appears to be sitting still. It doesn't appear to be tapping any part of its body on the ground, so I knew the sound wasn't being produced by the feet tapping on the ground, by their claws just touching the ground when they walk. And the pedipalps didn't seem to be drumming on the ground, the appendages near their mouths. And so I actually ended up talking to someone about it who has done some work with spiders and who had actually heard about it at an arachnology conference. And she sent me some pages of like scientific articles, like from the scientific literature, where this had been documented that they will make sound through tapping their abdomens. And I think it was either using the pedipalps or the chelicerae, the mouth parts, for stridulation, and they would use it to make sound, and it was to find mates. And what I found really impressive when I heard them doing it was I was just out hiking and I could hear it from a pretty considerable distance away. I didn't have to be very close to them to hear it, and I could actually stand still in the trail and listen around me. And if I heard it somewhere, I could go over and find the spider that was making the sound. And I just found that really impressive that they could produce a sound that loud, and I hadn't heard of them doing that before.
What type of spider?
It's primarily wolf spiders that do this. I think this was a species that I saw was probably a drumming sword wolf spider. I think the name is Gladicosa gullosa, and they're known to do that. They're known to make drumming and stridulatory sounds to attract mates. I think there is one other species, or either that or another entire genus that is primarily found in Europe that is known to do that, or in some other part of the United States. But the one that is known to do that around here, I think, would be the drumming sword wolf spider or spiders in that genus. So this is the video I got. I'm not sure if the audio is gonna work with it, but you can see the spider crawling around on the leaves, and you can see a little bit of the abdomen tapping as well. Let me see, it might help to turn my volume up. I think sometimes with the presentations on Zoom, you also have to share the sound as well as the
Yeah,
screen.
but it should be there though. It should be.
Yeah.
All right. Whatever.
Yeah, maybe we can get that to work after. Might have to stop sharing for just a minute to get this to go out of the video now. I think I'm not sure how I would close out of this.
Have to go to the next slide again.
Yeah, I think I would need to close out of the video first to do that.
Stop it. There you go.
That worked.
Yeah.
So another thing I wanted to talk about that I'm just really interested in general is natural pest control. Spiders are known to be insectivores. I only know of one species that doesn't feed on entirely insects, and some of them eat a lot of insects. And so some researchers were thinking about how they could be useful for natural pest control. And a study was actually done on it with a species of spider that's known to live in colonies in large groups where they'll make these large communal webs where many, many individuals will live in one area. And they tested how effective they would be for protecting tomato plants. And the researchers found that it worked really well. And I also saw another article from, I think it was the Indian Society for Arachnology, and they investigated how it seemed like the spider population being very large in a certain area helped to prevent a malaria outbreak, because during a flood, the mosquitoes were extremely abundant. There were lots of them, and they noticed a lot of them were getting caught in spider webs, and that seemed to kind of buffer the impact that this huge mosquito outbreak, like the huge boom in population, it seemed to buffer that and help prevent extreme outbreaks resulting from that. So another thing I thought was really interesting that I also read in Biology of Spiders, a book that I would really highly recommend to anyone that is interested in spiders, is that it's believed that certain spiders, specifically in the family Agelenidae, can actually determine distances and will use that ability to go the shortest possible distance after wandering out of their webs. And it sounds like mostly how they determined that they did this, that they determined distances with is that they would kind of wander with a meandering path out of their webs, and then after they were ready to come back, they would go in almost a perfectly straight line back. And it sounds like some of them would also use landmarks to navigate, which is also really interesting and shows that they could have decent memory. And jumping spiders, I thought I should probably talk about jumping spiders with this because out of any spiders, a lot of people that are not interested at all in spiders and don't like them like jumping spiders because it's hard not to think they're cute. Everybody seems to like jumping spiders. And they're also really interesting, and a lot of studies on neurobiology and how they use their brains have been done on jumping spiders, mostly because of their exceptional vision. And then also what I'm going to talk about today, how they seem to be really good problem solvers. And so some studies had shown that they'll hunt other spiders. They primarily feed on other spiders, and they'll actually change their strategy based on what species they're hunting and seemingly also their past successes and failures. And another study I read actually involved putting the spiders on a little island in a bowl of water, like this container of water with an area they could get to across the water. And the study tested how they would get across the water based on their past experiences. And individuals that had success jumping across the water in the past did it again when put in that situation. And those that didn't have success with jumping across the water tried to swim instead. And the opposite also applied. If any had success swimming across the water, they would do that again instead of jumping. And so what that showed is that they seem to be able to solve problems outside of what they might normally encounter in the wild. Another thing I find really interesting with spiders is how they take in stimulus and stimuli from their environment, and it's actually primarily done with organs on their legs, not really things on their faces like we're used to with mammals and vertebrates. They actually have sensory hairs and slits on their legs, and they're just distributed all over the legs, and I think actually all over the body as well. And they allow them possibly to taste and smell. A lot of studies have found that they will react really dramatically to certain tastes or smells getting near the organs on their legs. And I'd actually even heard of a study, I think, where the researchers had used mustard or something or some molecule from mustard and put it on the spider's leg, and it reacted by flicking its leg really hard and then trying to clean it off. And so researchers think they might be able to taste and smell, and then the hairs on their legs have also been shown to be able to give them what has been referred to as touch at a distance senses, where they basically can feel things they aren't touching. And it's primarily used for sensing vibrations to hunt prey. Like, for example, a lot of spiders specialize in things like moths or crickets, and their hairs are designed to sense the wing beats of moths or the walking patterns of crickets. I also wanted to talk about how silk is produced. I found that really interesting, and I really like taking any opportunity I can get to research chemistry to do with things in the natural world. And I found that silk was a really good opportunity to do that. So I have some basic gland diagrams here. I got them from an Australian museum, and the credit is in the citation list, the works cited page. And you can kind of see how there's a gland. It's labeled on in the diagram. It's in the second part of it, in the second circle down. And the silk at first is held in a liquid form in the gland. And what some researchers have attributed that to is what they're referring to as salt bridges in the silk, which are basically bonds between the amino acids and proteins, and that keeps it in a liquid form. And it also contains polar amino acids too, which when they're polar, that means they can dissolve in water usually. They're water soluble. And so because of that, it's easier for it to stay in a liquid form. And as the silk travels down the duct out of the gland, the particles that make up the salt bridges, the ions like sodium, chloride, and other ions, they leave the silk and go into the cells, I think around the duct, the silk duct, and water also leaves it. And then the silk duct is acidified by pumping hydrogen ions into it, which also causes the salt bridges to further break down, which makes the amino acids elongate fully into beta strands. And as it's pushed out of the duct and out to make a strand of silk, basically what I read was that these beta strands line up in a parallel alignment and then hydrogen bond to each other to make a beta sheet. And I actually have a basic diagram of one right here. That isn't the exact beta sheet that would be found in spider silk, but it's pretty similar to what one would look like that you would find in spider silk. And I think that's one thing that makes spider silk so strong is that structure where the two strands or several strands are hydrogen bonded together and compressed together. It helps make the silk really strong. It has been debated, I've found online, whether spider silk is actually antimicrobial. Some researchers initially thought it was, and it seemed to be because of a high vitamin K content, a high content of potassium. And I've seen mixed things online in scientific literature. I've read one article that where the scientists were arguing that it is antimicrobial and that it does prevent bacterial growth and prevents the web from decomposing. And then immediately after that, I read another article that said, no, it's a myth that spider silk is antimicrobial. We have no evidence that it is, and our evidence says that it isn't. So it's hard to say right now whether spider silk actually is antimicrobial, and it really depends on what article you read, whether it is or not, what the researchers are saying. So another thing I wanted to talk about is how diverse spider webs are and how you sometimes can use that to narrow down what type of spider you're looking at to some degree. Like, for example, in the top corner under the title on the slide, you can see the burrow of a burrow living wolf spider, and they use a little bit of silk to make that, and then an orb web and a small web that a jumping spider actually appears to have made. I have heard that jumping spiders will make webs, but they don't use them to catch prey. They primarily use them just to rest in and for rearing young to hold the eggs. And there are also sheet webs and cobwebs, and some spiders are actually known to make orb webs and make some type of design on them. A lot of them will make zigzag patterns or sometimes just random looking patterns like that. And that's another thing that's kind of debated among researchers why spiders do that. Some think it's to prevent large animals from walking into the web and destroying that. It's because that's pretty common with other spiders that don't make those designs for things to not see the web and walk into it and just knock it completely down. And then some people were also thinking that it could be to attract prey, but I'm not sure if any experiments really support if that works or not. Sometimes webs can be used to identify a spider, sometimes down to family. It can have some pitfalls, such as that some families will make the same type of web. Like there are several spider families that are sometimes all referred to as orb weavers, and they all make kind of what people think of as an orb web, the big round vertical web. And there are some differences, it seems like, between those different types of orb webs, but in general, it can be kind of hard to differentiate the families based on webs when you get webs like that. So I wanted to talk about taking photos for identification too. I see a lot of pictures of spiders posted online that I have a really hard time identifying just because they don't show things like eye arrangement or just certain details that I might need to narrow it down to species. And I know it's pretty hard to take a good picture of a spider. I know that from experience. I've chased spiders back and forth on branches and cornered them and tried to catch them to get a good picture, and I still don't even then. So I understand that it can be hard to get a good picture of a spider, but some tips I have is to get the front of the prosoma or the cephalothorax. That's basically what a lot of people would think of as the head. It's where the eyes are. And the front is particularly important because it'll show the arrangement of the eyes clearly, which can be helpful in a lot of cases for narrowing down to family or at least a group of families that a spider could be. And then also from above and the side to take get markings, include them in pictures, and also include if the spinnerets are clearly visible in photos, because some families that look similar have differences in how prominent their spinnerets are. So I thought it would be good to give some tips on identification too, in case anyone is interested in that. And what a lot of people use to identify spiders, if you're just going off of photos and not really like dissection or looking at it under a microscope, is eye arrangement, the shapes of the prosoma and epistosoma, which the epistosoma would just be the abdomen, like the second segment of the spider, and then also the lengths of the different leg pairs relative to each other, the hairiness and appearance of the hairs, and also tarsal claws in the presence of claw tufts. Some spiders have claw tufts, which are basically just little puffs of specialized hairs under their claws, and others don't. And that can be useful for distinguishing certain families, and also how prominent the spinnerets are and the size and shape. And then finally, after looking at those details and determining family, it can be useful to look at the markings. And if you want to try to identify spiders, it's good to look at photos of local spiders and become more familiar with their traits, practice, and I would also suggest looking into a high quality guide. One that I really like to use is Spiders of North America by Sarah Rose. So one common family that, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people are really fond of, especially compared to other groups of spiders, is Salticidae, or the jumping spiders. And I included a few common species here. And one particularly interesting species I wanted to go over here is Mavia inclemens, the dimorphic jumping spider. And what's particularly interesting about this species is there are three different forms if you include the female. And it's because the males actually have two different forms. There's dimorphism within one sex. And so the females and the males can look like entirely different species. Both of these here are males, and just those alone look like two completely different species. And they look somewhat like a different species from the female. And so that's something really useful to know when you're identifying spiders. Another common group is the orb weavers. I see a lot of them around, especially around buildings and towns. They're common to see with big vertical orb webs. And a common species a lot of people usually see is the yellow garden spider, also microthenas and cross orb weavers. Another one I see a lot is six-spotted orb weavers. And something I wanted to point out is a couple of families that are similar to the orb weavers I just showed. And I've actually confused the two before when giving identifications, these families with each other. And one is Tetranathidae and the other is Uloboridae. And they are both somewhat similar to orb weavers. I think sometimes they're included in the same guild, like in an informal grouping of a bunch of different families. And sometimes they're grouped together. And They're somewhat similar. A difference I've noticed between Tetranathidae and the other orb weavers is that Tetranathids tend to have longer, shinier abdomens. The shape tends to be a bit different. And they also have different mouth parts. The mouth parts of the other orb weavers tend to be kind of squarish in shape, where the Tetranathids have longer mouth parts. And for that reason, they're sometimes called the long-jawed orb weavers. And with Uloboridae, the main difference I've noticed with a lot of them is also the mouth parts and the abdomen, but also how they hold their legs. You'll notice in this picture, this spider is holding its two front legs out really straight and has them elongated out in front of it. And that's something that can be kind of helpful for determining the difference between that and another orb weaver, is that it might hold its legs out in front of it like that when it's sitting in its web. One common species I wanted to go over that is probably one of the most common species to see in your house is the eastern parson spider. And they're just these little dark colored ground dwelling spiders with some white markings on their abdomens and sometimes on the cephalothorax. And the legs can vary in color. I've found them to usually be pink or orange and slightly translucent, but they can also be kind of similar in color to the rest of the body. And like I said, they're just very common to find in your house. They're harmless, and if anything, they're probably eating insects and helping to keep your house clean. And so they're not bad to have around. And I see people online asking what these are a lot. And so I thought I could go over that. So if anyone has seen these, it would be clarified now what it actually is. Another common type of spider to see in your house would be fulcids. They're basically just these spiders that have really long legs, kind of long oval-shaped abdomen. A lot of people actually call them daddy long-legged spiders, which can actually also refer to another animal, which I'll actually be going over at the end of this presentation. And they're also completely harmless, like the eastern parson spider. They're not really going to hurt anything. Their bodies are very delicate and they're not really a problem to have around. They will eat insects in your house, and I don't get rid of them in my house. I have them everywhere. And I just thought it would be good to go over them because they're pretty common to see, and it seems like not everyone knows what they are when they see them in their house. And so I wanted to clear that up. This is another pretty common group to come across, and they are the fishing and nursery web spiders. I see them when I'm out hiking a lot. They're common to see near water and just even in your backyard or when you're out hiking in leaves and things like that. And so this is one genus right here. And these are really common to see near water and in woodlands. These are the spiders that are commonly referred to as fishing spiders. And I've actually seen pictures of them even catching tadpoles online. They'll catch a lot of different things and they like to hunt near water. And they're actually able to walk on the water surface because of hairs on their feet. The nursery web spider is another common member of this group that can be seen a lot. Something I've actually had trouble with is confusing them with wolf spiders and with the family Lycosidae, and their eye arrangement is slightly different, so that can be useful for distinguishing those two groups. And Lycosidae is actually the next group I'll be going over. These are a few common species right here that you might see around in the woods or in wood piles or sometimes in your basement or in your house. And they're just interesting spiders. They'll actually carry their egg sacs and their babies on their backs, and it's not uncommon to run into them in the summer carrying an egg sac attached to their spinnerets. And after that, the eggs hatch, the babies will usually ride on the back and the cephalothorax for sometimes up to a week or more. I've heard sometimes even several weeks. And I just thought that was really interesting because parental care isn't really overly common with invertebrates other than in species like ants and bees. And some other commonly seen spiders that I don't really have grouped in any specific way are crab spiders, funnel web spiders, house spiders, and woodlouse spiders. And those all belong to different families. And I also wanted to go over harvestmen, which are commonly referred to as spiders, but actually aren't. And one myth that has been going around for a long time, and that probably anyone that's been in a public school has heard, is that they're the most venomous spider on the planet, but their mouth parts are too small for them to bite you. And something that's actually really interesting with this group is they actually don't have venom glands at all, as far as I know. They have no venom and they don't even use it for subduing prey, so they're completely harmless. And they aren't spiders at all. They belong to an entirely separate order. They're their own group. And they are a little bit different from spiders, like, for example, in that they have one body segment, one distinct body segment. They have multiple body segments that are fused from what I've heard, but only one body segment is distinct as opposed to the two distinct body segments of spiders. And they also usually have fewer noticeable eyes than spiders, usually two as opposed to the 8 or 6 that's typical of most spiders. And they're known to scavenge for food. I've seen them seemingly feeding on already dead insects and just any decomposing material. And I've also heard they will catch their own prey as well. So finally, one more thing I wanted to talk about is what spiders are good for, why they're good to have in our ecosystems, and why we should keep them around, and also some threats they face. And one reason I wanted to bring up that I thought some people might find interesting is that they're actually really good food for birds. And a lot of birds actually rely on them for raising their young due to the content of taurine, which a lot of baby birds need to develop properly. And they are also really good for controlling insect populations, as I had brought up, and they also act as food for other insects and a lot of other animals other than birds. So it's kind of mixed online and looking into information that I could find whether they're actually declining or if any specific group is endangered, but some researchers are finding them to trend downward or are expecting them to with the decline of a lot of insects. And so I wanted to bring up some things that might be threatening spiders. And one thing is pesticides, and reducing use of pesticides could help, and also preventing habitat loss. And another big threat to spiders is collection for the pet trade, especially for larger species that are common in the pet trade, like tarantulas. And something that would really help with that is restricting collection and also encouraging people to breed them in captivity, because the pet trade doesn't always necessarily threaten these animals as long as it's being done responsibly and if they're being bred in captivity as opposed to all being collected from the wild. And that's pretty much all I want to go over. So I'll take questions now if anybody has any.
So I'm curious on the daddy long legs that you have shown. So they are not a spider, but an arachnid.
Yeah, I'll go back to the slide. They do belong to that group. They are arachnids,